Hello, how you doing? Thank you for looking in on my video, and welcome to all the new subscribers. I'm very grateful to you subscribing, and thank you so much. So my purpose for doing my channel really and truthfully was to try and explain what it was like to work in probation, but also to try and get people to think about what are the causes of crime, and to find out what causes of crimes, how crimes occur, and how people start offending by looking at their life stories. So I've kind of done this, and often tell people's life stories about how they started offending. And my aim, truthfully, is to try and encourage people to think about the causes of crime and how can we, as a society, be a bit kinder towards each other and stop crimes occurring in the first place. Stop people becoming offenders in the first place. Because, to be honest with you, the prisons are full and they don't necessarily stop people offending. And the one thing victims want is to help ensure that other people don't become victims. And yes, some people are so dangerous and do need to go to prison to protect us from them, but they're not going to stop. That doesn't stop them coming out of prison. They'll be coming out of prison someday, and the chances are that statistically, if people serve a short sentence, they're much more likely to reoffend than spending a period on probation. And I can assure you that on probation, as probation officers, we do work hard to put over the victim's viewpoint of crimes, and because often offenders don't consider that enough, or don't think about it, or don't even care. So we really work hard to put over victim perspectives. So I really must stress that. Unfortunately, in my last video, it's a tricky case, very worrying, and bear in mind these cases are from 90 years ago, and I think it's important to understand that probation don't actually meet the victims very often. It's quite rare. I did on one occasion, and it was an incest case where Dad had committed an offence against his daughter. And to be honest with you, it really upset me, and I had trouble sleeping that night, and the whole thing really worried me, to be honest, and made me really quite upset, you know. So in that last case, some people felt that I was a bit too kind to the young man and that I didn't put over the victim's perspective enough. But I will point out that, you see, the police deal with the victim, and we in probation rely upon the evidence that the police give us for the report. Now, if you've been watching my other videos, you'll understand that often the information we get from the police is sadly lacking. Sometimes, you know, we wouldn't get any papers at all. And I thought that was dreadful, because you need to present the facts of what happened to the offender, and you can't believe what they've told you. You need something, you know, you can't let them explain the offence away. You need an explanation from the prosecution and the police and from the victim. Now, fair comment, I think that victims do need much more support in society, and I would really ask for that and champion that. And victims really need to be considered in the court process. And I think this is why they brought in statements from the victim. And I actually think that there should be more support for victims as well, because it's awful. But talking to victims, in my experience, is that they really do want the offenders to be challenged and for them to stop offending. And many of the programs that probation do are effective at this and actually do challenge and are quite tough. And I don't think probation, I'm retired now from probation, but I don't think probation really explain what they do enough. and they don't put over this message that, for example, sex offenders, when they're put on a sex offender program, it is very challenging, it is very tough, and it is very often effective, and dare I say it, more effective than actually putting somebody on 6 months in prison where their offending would not be challenged. So part of that process is that we do put over the victim's perspective. My other purpose in these videos, and I'll be honest with you, was to promote a book I've written. And again, the aim of my book is to put over what causes people to offend, their life stories, and I encourage people to consider the options, because I think we're quite, this country, there's been an escalator, there's been a thirst, there's been sentence inflation, and we've got tougher and tougher and tougher, and we're sending more and more people to jail. Statistically, I think if you check this out, it's true. And it doesn't necessarily result in a drop in crime. And meanwhile, probation have been given a lot more work to do, and this has involved supervising people coming out of jail. And I would think that we need to look at what causes crime in the first place, and we need to put our resources into stopping people climbing that escalator and doing more crimes. We need to nip crime in the bud early on as much, rather than just banging people away to prison after the event is too late. So that's my purpose in the book and in telling these stories. So today's case is an 18-year-old who's up in court for committing a domestic burglary. Serious offence, and we know how it really annoys, how upsetting it is for victims. Absolutely dreadful offence, isn't it? Now, this offence involved, just put it briefly, it took place in university halls of residence, and there'd been a number of thefts in there, security problems, people have been wandering into the halls of residence and stealing students' property. And this has been going on for about 3 or 4 days. And our young man, I should call him Teddy, 18 years old, wandered in on the day in question and was caught by a student wandering around in the student accommodation, but he hadn't stolen anything at that point. And he denied being involved in those previous days, but for sure it was probably him. The reason why I say that is that he's been involved with burglaries previously, and he'd done, already at the age of 18, he had 4 previous convictions for burglary, and imagine he'd been committing others. Now, when you hear his life story, I think it really I hope, will convince people that we need to focus our energies on the young people very often at the outset of their criminal stories. This guy began offending at age 7. Incredible, isn't it? Age 7, he started truanting from primary school and hanging around, breaking into garden sheds. Really, really sad. And he began offending age 7, and he was truanting a lot. And when efforts were made to try and get him to go to school, he ran away from home and he started sleeping in the open air and stealing from shops. My God. Again, efforts were made when he was put in a new intake to go into secondary school. He only lasted in secondary school for 4 weeks, right? And he never did a day's education after that, not in a special unit or anywhere. Terrible, you know, at that point, we really needed to get grip of this guy, but it didn't happen, all right? So he starts associating with older kids, breaking into sheds, breaking into cars. He starts taking drugs aged 11 and 12. By age 13, he's on the highly addictive crack cocaine. He's committing burglaries with older friends. He was caught on one occasion put in secure accommodation. Didn't stop him. And then he was sent to young offender institution. I think he associated with more criminals and possibly came out a more sophisticated criminal. And the thing that I discovered as well was at some point he'd been placed on probation and community service. At the time we called it a combination order. There was no record of that on the previous convictions. And as in my other talks, quite often the record of previous convictions that the prosecution had from the police were inaccurate and not up to date. And what a disservice to the victims of that crime. Yes? And can you imagine my frustration as well? And he'd been breached of that combination order. He didn't even attend once. And no record of it before the court. He didn't even attend once. And we organised for a warrant to be issued for his arrest, immediate arrest, and it was never executed. You know, what's going on? And that only came up because I did a conscientious stop and did some double checking around the office and consulted. And why wasn't it on the record of convictions? Why didn't the police execute the warrant? You know, and what a disservice, may I add, to the victims of that original offence that he did nothing. So the outcome of the case from my court report was, given that he was in breach and not being addressed, I couldn't propose anything apart from custody. And long term, I think, you know, a lot of work needed to be done with this young man and to get him sorted. But I'm really using this case to illustrate that we really need to intervene early on. Now, in the media, in my local area, people being excluded from the local secondary schools in the area where I live has gone up by 70% this year. 70%. Now, probation officers will tell you anecdotal evidence and statistical evidence is that the younger people start offending, the harder it is to get them to stop. And the higher the risk of them re-offending, the younger people start offending. So if somebody comes before you and they start offending at 7, the risk of them re-offending is exceptionally high. Exceptionally high. And it really worries me that so many people are being excluded from school. And I heard on the news that exclusions from primary schools have gone up enormously. Very worrying indeed, because unless these people we get a grip of this situation, the chances are they're going to be on that pathway like this young man, Teddy, who ended up, he's just going to be in jail for most of his life, isn't he? So I'm quite passionate about this. So please do look out for my book. There are details on YouTube. Thank you so much for looking in. And I hope it makes sense what I'm saying. And just a little thought as well is that a lot more work's being put towards the prisons and probation, and meanwhile resources have been cut. So you've got probation supervising an awful lot of people coming out of jail now that we didn't used to, and no additional resources have been given. But anyway, I've been retired for over 10 years now, and I'm 69 years old, and actually I've been self-employed in recent years, and I actually work with adults with learning disabilities, and I actually work with people with dementia. And although I don't make a huge living out of it, it gives me a great deal of pleasure to do this work and to help others. So that's my mission, is really to help others. I think we need to be kinder in the world. I think we need to be kinder towards victims and more supportive. And we need to really invest time and effort in sorting out youngsters that go off the rails. Anyway, many thanks, and keep smiling, and all the very best to you. Cheers now. Bye-bye.